In your testimony, you mentioned that when mice were injected with large doses of glyphosate, that some did manifest symptoms of cancer-like conditions, but that when the mice were just exposed to glyphosate, there was no effect, there were no symptoms. It seems to me that that's a huge difference. No one is suggesting that humans be injected with large doses of glyphosate. Why is it that IARC doesn't acknowledge the distinction between high doses that are being injected and simple exposure or inhalation, which has not resulted in any cancer-like symptoms? And it seems to me that they are intentionally misleading the American people, and maybe they have some kind of a vendetta against chemical companies. But why or how do you explain the lack of honesty and openness and transparency by IARC?
So thank you, Chairman Smith, for that question. So I'm sorry if my my South Carolina accent comes out. So it's ingest. So I through the oral route, not inject through.
Okay, ingest.
Ingest through the oral route.
Okay.
So apologize for that lack of
no,
clarity.
so
the question is. So I think it's important that I'm not going to comment on the value of the IARC process. I can tell you that EPA has been fully transparent in our evaluation. Our draft issue paper was reviewed by the Scientific Advisory Panel. In fact, the transcript from that meeting is publicly accessible. We're now looking forward to public comment on our white paper for the cancer.
Was that, I didn't understand that. It's just a statement as to why you think they have been less than transparent?
I think that's, I'm not going to debate the transparency of IARC. What we have done at EPA, whereas in cases where IARC has looked at review articles, we've acquired the raw study reports. So we've been able to look at information. The full study reports where IARC cannot do that.
I'm just curious, when you talked about large doses of ingestion by the mice, how much are you talking about? A large percentage of their body weight, or how much did they ingest?
So in terms of toxicology studies, often studies with glyphosate are in the ingestion of hundreds of milligrams per kilogram per day, and what we define as the limit dose. Internationally, most regulatory organizations recognize 1,000 milligrams per kilogram per day as the international standard for the limit dose. And in many cases, glyphosate studies are actually done at that limit dose, which is why we conclude there's very little hazard.
And it's very unlikely that any human would ingest anything near to that equivalent amount.
Oh, no.
Okay. Dr. Pastoor, you pointed out, and I was going to highlight as well, that I think IARC has found that something like 999 out of 1,000 substances created cancer. Only one was deemed to be probably not cancer-causing. Do you think that their process is flawed, their investigations are flawed, and do you think that they have predetermined conclusions they're trying to reach?
They may or may not. I can't really comment in particular on glyphosate. I am not here representing a critique or a defense of glyphosate. But what I would say is that there is a flaw in their scientific process when you don't take into consideration potency, which Chairman Smith, you just brought up, is that if a significant portion of a body weight of an animal is being overwhelmed with a particular chemical, whether it's glyphosate or anything else, and you're declaring something to be carcinogenic, that's erroneous science. That's offsetting. That's misinforming the public, and it doesn't serve any process, and it's actually more harmful than helpful.
Okay, I agree, and I like that phrase, erroneous science. I'm going to adopt it in this case, and maybe in other instances as well. Dr. Tarone, you wrote a paper in 2016, and you came to the conclusion that IARC's designation of glyphosate was a result of a, quote, flawed and incomplete evaluation of experimental evidence. What is the general scientific community's response been to that paper? And what was IARC's response?
There's been surprisingly little response, actually. I've been amazed.
Okay.
But with regard to IARC, I mean, this paper has gone through an incredible, I mean, it's the weirdest experience I've ever had in 44 years of publishing in peer-reviewed journals. And I mean, really, it's stunning. But IARC did eventually submit a letter to the journal responding to my paper. And I received this in January of 2016. And, no, 2017, I'm sorry. And I responded to their letter. And I assumed that both letters would be published in the journal along with the paper. IARC's letter was not responsive to any of the specific criticisms I raised.
Okay.
They complained about it, you know, who paid you to do this, and what role did they play in writing and editing the paper. They raised technical issues about what constitutes a research study, and that this wasn't a research study, but they didn't deal with any of the specifics.
Okay.
And for some reason, neither letter was published, and I've never been fully.
Okay.
I don't know. Can't figure out why that
The
happened.
point being, IARC was not responsive to the substance of your.
Not to the substance. And as I said, nobody has specifically refuted any of the claims that I've made about the exclusion of rodent studies that should have been included.
Okay. Thank you, Dr. Tarone. That concludes my time, and the gentlewoman from Texas, the ranking